Yo, what's up? My name is James Cool. I am the owner of PaterDFS.com. I'm joined by Pablo today. We are slightly late. We're doing a little bit of a later Slate talk, and therefore I brought some wine. I'm not sure if Ari brought anything. You bring something? Oh, there you go.
My tea with lemon. In line with my boomer reputation.
You're fucking ancient, dude.
I am. No lies detected.
I like to have tea every once in a while. Like I think that tea is good every once in a while. But it's not the thing that I prefer to bring onto a show like this. I'd rather get drunk. I'm also wearing a special shirt today. It says "Anime over Pussy." It's something I hold dear to life. Coming to a merch store near you. It's gonna have a cool logo on the back of it and everything like that. But I'm feeling pretty good today. Last week, I think that we went into the slate with like a pretty good understanding of where we wanted to hold on to things, and I had a lot of conviction last week, so I only played one lineup, which is not what I've been doing lately. But it didn't turn out super great, only because like there were certain chalk things that hit across the entire slate, and a cash lineup scored you like 190 or some shit. So that's never going to be a slate that I win. I think that this week looks much more like a James kicks the shit out of the slate and wins $1 million kind of slate. So I feel pretty good about it.
This is a good James slate. This is a good pay dirt slate. So I think we've got a good number of things we could talk about, and I am going to do something though. Nikki said I interrupt you a lot, so I'm going to really try not to. But we do have a schedule for the show, and we try to keep it to a tight hour. So we will keep things organized and moving.
To be very fair, I did shows with Blender for 3 years, and so any level of Pablo talking over me is not even close.
Nothing.
I have dealt with doing shows and writing books with Jordan Cooper. All right, so you don't got to worry about that. I appreciate Nikki standing up for me, but for sure, like I have dealt with considerably worse. Even there's been some other shows that I've gone on where it's just like, man, I understand that you have opinions, but sometimes just shut the fuck up.
So
there were times. Hold on, I'll let you get started.
Yeah.
Times I can remember one specific time where Jordan went on this tirade for like literally 10 minutes, and I had to stop him and be like, "Dude, shut up!" we get it. I had to tell him to shut up on air. So it's these shows are. I'm very good at talking through and talking under. So you know what, Pablo, I understand that you were feeling a type of way by what Nikki said, but my feelings were not hurt.
I aim to please. I want the people to be happy, and the people want to hear from James. And my takes are important, but yours are too. So what I would say about the slate that is different from the jump here, it's a pretty different slate than last week. It's a very different slate. Last week we had a very clear-cut roster construction.
Mm-hmm.
We had a top 5 running back pool that was clearly like above and beyond. Rip me because I did not really play much Jonathan Taylor, and like he was the one of the 5 I didn't have much of. But that's neither here nor there. This is a new week. This week, I would classify this slate as a much more of a choose your own adventure slate. There are a wide variety of build structures. What I think is exciting, especially for large field players, but even for someone like me who plays smaller field, limited entry stuff, is that depending on your contest list, I think this is the type of slate where good players will build appropriate lineups for their contest size, because there are multiple levers you can pull depending on where you want to plant your flag in terms of your leverage, both in terms of macro construction strategy and also on individual plays. There's a lot of like direct, indirect leverage plays too, where you can play a stack or a running back instead of it as a form of leverage off the stack. And so it's both fun, but what's been interesting to me is like I'm a little bit surprised by some of the ownership. And I think that part of the reason we're seeing a lot flatter ownership outside of a few players, we'll talk about those players, is that because it is such a choose your own adventure slate, because there are so many different ways you can build, and because there's so many different options, my feeling in general is that the crowd gets a little bit overwhelmed on these slates, and it also there are also a lot of good options, and it leads to flatter ownership. So
Mhm.
I think that lends itself well to players who can build well for their contest size, and I think that we will have a lot of good edge in terms of how to exploit the options this week.
Yeah, I'm looking through the ownership right now, and I'm kind of sizing up the range of outcomes so that I can take a look at things a little bit better here. But I had said I did a show earlier this week with Bobby Fi over at True DFS, who Pater is a partner with, by the way. You should go check that out. But I had noted that while I thought that there were some things about this week that were similar to last week, we have cheap quarterbacks that we can exploit again. That's one thing that I am going to continue to exploit, as DraftKings has just fucked the algorithm. Yep. We have a lot of mid-range wide receivers to exploit. Again, that's something that we'll be able to continue to take advantage of. But this week, the big difference this week is that we don't have a plug-and-play running back, and we don't have any plug-and-play 5K wide receivers. I think that people are going to try to force at least one of those things at wide receiver with Jacoby Myers, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Mm-hmm. But at running back, you don't really have a cheap option to make everything work. And that is something that people rely on pretty heavily to not make mistakes at wide receiver.
Yeah.
Because people suck at picking cheap wide receivers. They're really, really bad at it. And it's much easier to just choose the volume of a cheap running back and have a Jordan Mason that gives you, 25 fantasy points, even though it doesn't play the whole game, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that this week, that's the big functional difference, is that we don't have these plug-and-play options in the 5K range that unlock a lot of that wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 1 upside. That I think people are going to make some mistakes. And namely, I think the big mistake they're going to make is going to be going with Las Vegas stacks specifically. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my high-level read of the slate. For the most part, I think that a lot of the ownership makes sense, right? Like, it's not going to be that hard for me to build lineups that have a lot of ownership that I think look good. But I do think that there are going to be some people that make some pretty big mistakes this week.
Yeah, I think in regard to your point on wide receiver value, or at least mid-range value or punt value, I have started to think about the quarterback position. You made this point, I think, last week or the week before on this pod, on this talk, whatever you want to call it, about thinking about the quarterback, especially when it comes to value quarterbacks, as just like another position, no different than a flex position, right? And one of the things that I think one of the ways that I'm thinking about this slate, and I'll probably have 3 to 4 lineups, and I'll just admit up front, I don't have as much conviction in this slate as I did last week, is the decision between one of the pay down quarterbacks, which I would classify as Jackson Dart, who's basically a punt at 4,500. Mm-hmm. Mariota at 5K against Atlanta. Drake May at 5.5K, who's not quite as much as a punt against Carolina, and then Geno at 5.4K. One of those guys, admittedly, Jackson Dart is kind of in his own sort of salary point because he's so much lower than everybody else, versus paying up for like a Stafford, or even one of the elite quarterbacks like Hurts or Allen. Mm-hmm. Our sims very, 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 very clearly show, as do our range of outcomes, if you want to pull up the quarterback outcomes. And I double checked this right before we went on because I wanted to make sure nothing had changed from this morning when I looked, that it's very hard if you're just looking from a salary relief standpoint. It's very hard to convince yourself to not play one of the cheaper quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. For me, at least. What's interesting is that some of these quarterbacks like Geno or Stafford have elite pairing combinations, like Stafford with Puka and Devontae this week. Like those two receivers look like ridiculously good value in one of two games, the Indy LA game and the Chicago Las Vegas game, that are projected to be, have some shootout potential, but also carry some ownership. And Geno, similarly, you have an option around Jacoby, Trey Tucker, who's cheap, but has gotten a lot of volume, and Brock Bowers, if you think that he's healthy enough to start doing well against the Chicago team that has shown a ton of vulnerability against pass catchers. So one interesting thing to think about is, the trade-off here is like, do you play a Jackson Dart and then you don't have to play a pay down wide receiver or theoretically a punt tight end, because you're getting it through Jackson Dart, right? And for that matter, like you can kind of do that also with Mariota as well, and you can kind of do it with Drake May and Geno, but again, Jackson Dart's 4,500. Or you kind of have three options in my book. Like you can either go all the way down and just say like, I don't give a shit like about the correlation with the quarterback, like it's another position, and I'll pretend I have Geno and I'll just play Geno doubles without Geno. I'll just use Jackson, right? Or I'll play Stafford doubles without Stafford. I'll just use Jackson. You can go up to Stafford or Geno, but then you have to be ready to play some thinner, more fragile value. And we don't have a ton of great, like cheap value at wide receiver this week. Or you can play more of a balanced lineup where you're not playing anybody, but then you're sacrificing sort of at least one of the two priority studs this week. And I would push back on one thing you said about running back, which is I do think CMC is like almost lock and load this week, and our sims show that, our range of outcomes show that, and I think the whole industry like wants CMC. So I think to me, like anchor players in smaller fields seem to be Puka and CMC, and the bigger decision is, do I just go all the way down at quarterback, or am I comfortable enough with the value that I have to force if I go up to like a Stafford or Geno? And I'm curious to hear your take. I think I know your take because it would be surprising to me if it was different than last week or the week before.
Right. Yeah. So it's the same as the weeks before. Really, really quick. Let me answer a couple things from the chat. So Worthy is 5.8K. I don't know if I trust Worthy this week. I'll probably be 1 week late on him. Mitch, you're a little bit more, ballsy than I am, I guess is like the word. But like with a dislocated shoulder, I don't know if I can go there. But at 5.8K, if you think that he's fully healthy, that's a good deal. That's a good deal. Just tuning on, what's going on? What's going on? How you doing, bud? Hopefully this is the first time you come on the stream, and what's up? Let's see. Everyone knows you can play the 40-point chase the 40-point performance from a 4K wide receiver. It always works. Yeah, I mean, look, Trey Tucker, he shows up a lot in the portfolio manager. He shows up a lot in optimals. Like he projects pretty well at 4.2. But I want to point something out really quick, and I posted this in the Discord, and I'll just start sharing my screen here. But sorry, just find this really quick. Okay, so there you go. Here's the top players overall in fantasy points per game right now, right?
Can you zoom in on a little bit on that?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So here's the top 20 players right now in actual fantasy points per game. All right, Jonathan Taylor at 25. His expected fantasy points is 23.8. Sure, cool. Christian McCaffrey at 23.3, his expected is 29.08. That is a gaudy fucking expected fantasy points outcome. And expected fantasy points is the expected fantasy points average per game. So what you would expect their actual average to be. But then you come down here and it's like, okay, here's Trey Tucker. And yeah, it's great that he's averaging 19.73, but his expected fantasy points is only 13.44. And now that's in line with the median expectation of 12.62. That's fine. He's still a good deal. But I don't know if I want to catch, 20% ownership on Trey Tucker when he's been outpacing his expected fantasy points by that much. And a mistake that a lot of people make when they think about expected fantasy points per game is saying, oh, well, if they have more than their expected fantasy points per game, that means that they're doing better, and I should think that that's a good thing. No, fucking bad thing. That means that they have been really, really lucky, and variance has been on their side. When variance turns around, they're going to crash back down. The thing with Trey Tucker is that he doesn't necessarily get the kind of work in the areas of the field that we want him to get that leads to fantasy points the most. So he's been overproducing quite a bit. Quentin Johnson is another guy, like averaging 18.57, expected is 13.52. Like there's a handful of these guys who just have been way out producing. Rome Odunze averaging 20.9, expected is 15.34. So that I just think that people should be cautious of chasing these guys who produce on basically what I would call long shot production, because that's just not something that's replicable most of the time. So I wanted to show that really quick as we're talking about Trey Tucker, because he does look like a strong value.
Yeah.
But I would just be a little wary of him.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned about why you're worried about Trey Tucker, which I think we can extrapolate to the quarterback position, just to backtrack there for a second, is sometimes I think like a counter level to the fragility of a player, a counter lever, is his ownership.
Sure.
So while I, like much of the field, fear Jackson Dart in his first ever start in the NFL in a regular season game against the Chargers, it is a little bit surprising to me, and I'm curious to see when the cards flip over tomorrow if this is true. But like his projected ownership is ridiculously inefficient. Like this is one of those things where for cheaper players who have some fragility, right? Especially at wide receiver. And to some degree running back, although in PPR with DraftKings, it's usually like a little less fragile than the cheaper receivers, which is kind of what you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
The quarterback, like everybody's a little scared of Dart, and it is kind of like a scary place to play Dart. Like we shouldn't pretend it's not, but an efficient ownership for him and his price, given his range of outcomes, I don't know, it'd be like 15% maybe, like maybe 20, but not 5. And I'm not hearing much excitement across the industry at all. Like, oh, like whereas with Mac Jones 2 weeks ago, people were fine doing it. And even last week with Mariota, like we were totally fine doing it. And then this week with Jackson Dart, people are like, whoa, hold on, it's the Chargers. And look, I'm a Chargers stan. Like I think the Chargers are really fucking good this year. I think they probably will win that division. And they have like I think Herbert is looking like he's emerging as a elite quarterback.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's 45 fucking hundred, and it allows you to not have to force a bunch of shitty value in your flex positions, right? So, and again, you can use him, and you can pretend you have Geno or pretend you have Stafford, and just double those guys like you have them instead of him, right? And I'm not a sim user I'm a hand builder. But I'd be very surprised if the Sims didn't like that approach, because to me, it seems like a really intuitively logical approach.
Yeah, I think it's fucking crazy that people aren't just jamming these cheap quarterbacks. I've been saying it for weeks. Like if you let's just do this, that I've done this on every show now that I have been talking to, right? And let's just go to the overall range of outcomes, and let's just say, all right,
everyone under 5K.
Any player under 5K. And just show me what their projections are. Oh, hey, look at that. Jackson Dart is the highest. And even like Bryce Young, Tyler Warren is at 14. Spencer Rattler is at 14. Joe Flacco is at 12. Like, you don't even get down. Trey Tucker, people are like super gung-ho to play Trey Tucker at 4,200. And he has a median that's 5 points lower than Jackson Dart. If you just look at Jackson Dart as a player in comparison to other players in his price range, he just blows him out of the fucking water, man. Like he's he's by far the best value on this slate.
Yeah.
So I understand that it's the Chargers, and I understand that like maybe the Giants really suck dick, and they do. I think their play calling is bad. I think that like last week when everybody was crucifying Russell Wilson for that end zone like fiasco, they had like the red zone fiasco, it was 4 plays, and like everybody's like, oh, look how bad he looks, and I'm watching these plays and I'm like, the wide receivers are like walking off the line and like they're running into each other and there's no space. Where the fuck is Russell Wilson supposed to throw the ball? Like maybe the play calling is awful too, but at 4,500, like you're not looking for him to outscore Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. That's not the goal, right? The goal is to outscore all of the other players in his range and then also have a Christian McCaffrey outscore Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. That is what you do.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a 2v2 situation with quarterbacks. It's not a 1v1 situation.
Yeah. And I think that the other so I made that ownership point here, which is that Dart, everyone's scared of Dart. And so like, this is when you play the cheaper quarterback. Like you don't play him when it's fragile and everyone's playing him. Right. And the other context here that I think is important is if you sort our sheets by median or ceiling for the flex positions, wide receiver, running back, tight end, what we will see is that there are 2 pay up players who are outliers for their ceiling, and even at their expensive price have like a 3x that's better than almost all the cheaper players, which is CMC and Puka, right? Mm-hmm. And so to me, if you just start with Dark, CMC, and Puka, like you've got a great core right there. And I probably will do that in at least 2 of my 3 or 4 lineups. I just think those 2 guys you showed CMC's expected points and his usage is just insane. And Pearsall and Jennings are both a little bit banged up. I think what I heard earlier today was that Pearsall's probably going to play and Jennings is a true questionable. So, and they're playing the Jaguars. Like, it's like, this is a great spot. So I'm not going to overthink CMC. Puka is a good segue to talking a little bit about game environment. There's 2 games that I think are catching a good bit of steam, and I think it's appropriate, which is the Rams, Indianapolis, and the Bears, Vegas games. Both, by the way, late games, which for you like late swap people is nice from that standpoint. In general, I think late swapping is a little bit overplayed by the touts as like some huge edge. And for NFL, not for NBA, but I don't do NBA partially because I don't want to fucking deal with that. No. The other game that's interesting to think about just from an ownership standpoint, although people are not going to be the game stacking it the way they will be for the Chargers, for the Colts, Rams, and for the Raiders, Bears, is also the Chargers Giants, because it's an important game from the standpoint of some of the value plays in the Chargers Giants game. So I would just say that when I think about juicy games, 2 things I keep in mind. One, I think the field is generally overconfident about how those games get there. And I think there's going to be like a very common build pathway for Chicago, Las Vegas. It'll probably be like Geno doubles with Trey Tucker bring back or Jacoby Meyer bring back. People are generally scared right now of Bowers because his early production hasn't been good and he's been gimpy. The Rams Indy game, some people will get up to Stafford and they'll play Stafford doubles with Devontae and Puka, who both fucking project amazing, to be clear, right? The problem is Stafford's price relative to Dart. It's not Puka and Adams. And then people will play Tyler Warren across from that, right? That'll be like the way. Adonai Mitchell, I'm curious to see if you update usage numbers because other sites have Adonai Mitchell at 3,100 on the Colts is like really, really strong value because Pierce is out and they're basically giving Mitchell the Pierce role. So that might be a common punt bring back instead of Tucker if you want to go all the way down to 3,100. And then the Chargers-Giants game is interesting because of two things. Number one, Dart, and number two, Omari and Hampton. And I was really curious when I started diving into the slate and looking at your sheets, like, what does James have Hampton at? Because I don't think anybody believes that the Chargers are not going to score points against the Giants. Like, everybody thinks the Chargers are going to score points against the Giants, right? The question is are they going to do it through Hampton, or are they going to do it more through Keenan Allen, and maybe Ladd McConkey finally starts to get there? And then across from that, there's the Dart / Scadaboo discussion, which is we have Scadaboo as really strong value, which is a little problematic, but maybe not as problematic as you'd think, because Scadaboo has actually caught like a shit ton of passes the last 2 weeks. So you can actually play Dart with Scadaboo, which nobody's going to fucking do, because everyone's going to say, I can't play those two guys together. So I just want to hear your thoughts on sort of how you're approaching the Rams Indy game, the Vegas Bears game. And I want to point out to people that I think if you're playing those games, I would say two things. I try to be very thoughtful about the way I stack those games, meaning I think it's more powerful to overstack them if you're going to stack them and just hope they fucking go crazy. And I also think it's important to keep in mind, just like we talk about with baseball, if a team scores 13 fucking runs in baseball, you really like, it's not the 4 player every time, right? Like it may be Jonty on the Raiders. It may be Bowers. It's not necessarily Tucker and Myers, right? So I just said a lot, and I'll pause there, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So before I move forward, let's hit some comments here.
Yeah.
Love your new pixie cut.
This is just my boat all day on the boat. What my hair did after the boat. Not a new haircut.
It's a good haircut. Good.
Water's good for you.
I freshly shaved my head, so you can see that I got a little halo going on here. What anime do I watch? So I am currently watching through Jujutsu Kaisen, even though I hate it. I don't hate it. All right, it's entertaining, but like the story sucks. We're gonna finish up My Hero Academia when the new season comes out in a couple weeks. That has been terrific. The other one that we're mostly watching is Soul Leader. We tried to watch Chainsaw Man and Demon Slayer, but Demon Slayer's fucking dog shit, dude. That is like, Pablo, you're an old man, so you don't care about this, but understand.
You're literally speaking for, like, I have no idea what you're talking about right
now. Totally understand. Soul Eater fucking sucks, okay? I'm not going to go on a big rant here, but like Soul Eater is maybe, or no, not Soul Eater, Demon Slayer. Demon Slayer is like probably the worst anime that I've ever watched. I've seen AOT right. Actually, we are also watching AOT right now. That's me and my friend Lex and Margaret together. And Margaret's addicted to it, so it's really good. But those are kind of high-level things for anime. What happened to my Rattler love? Like, I still think that Rattler is a good play for the exact same reasons why we just talked about Dart for a couple minutes. Like he's 4,700. He's right there with Dart, and I think that all of the things that Pablo said apply as well. Like you can just do double stacks and then just say, I'm not going to use Matthew Stafford. I'm not going to use Jalen Hurts. I'm not going to use Justin Herbert. Instead, I'm just going to use Spencer Rattler and just play him. Any of the cheap quarterbacks, any of these guys who are 5K or less, the value on them is just incredible. So I think that it is worth continuing to play them. But moving on to the question at hand. So the way that I always look at this kind of stuff, right? If the Rams passing stacks are going to be popular, I have interest in Kyren Williams, right? Because we don't know who's going to score a whole bunch of points. We know that their team total is implied at 26.15. But like, we don't know who's going to score all of those. Now it's a fairly good bet that it's going to be one of the three of Puka, Devontae, and Kyren Williams. Likely two of those three, right? Like it's probably going to be at least two of those guys. Now, that being said, why would you not play Kyren Williams plus Puka Nacua? Why would you not play Kyren Williams plus Devontae Adams? Like, it's totally fine to play those two guys together without Matthew Stafford. I think that Kyren Williams makes for a really strong leverage play, especially when you go and you look at the range of outcomes and you say, okay, just show me running backs. Like, Kyren Williams at looking at 13% ownership, I'll take the under on that. I think he comes in even lower than that. And his expected fantasy points have been strong. His projection is fine. He's only 6,300. This is a 7K running back, right? Like his role is good. So I have a lot of interest in Kyron Williams. Same thing with Ashton Genty. Now, Genty does not project quite as well. He projects 14, and his expected fantasy points have been low. Now, that is a concern for me overall. And the reason being is expected fantasy points for running backs is really, really important because there's a lot of weight put into the red zone and goal line usage, right? How many touches and opportunities they get inside the red zone is paramount to their upside because less than 1% of total touchdowns happen for running backs from outside of the red zone. So expected fantasy points can help us kind of say this player has had X amount of work in the red zone. And when a player like Genty has only an expected fantasy points of like 10, that's worrisome. Now, a lot of that comes from the Raiders have just not had that many plays in the red zone. That's another reason why Trey Tucker has bad expected fantasy points is because they have scored from outside of the red zone. They've been very lucky on that kind of stuff. But that should just tell you that unless this team gets lucky or has variance run their way, they're likely not going to be scoring very many fantasy points, right? They're just not going to be scoring points in general.
Yeah.
So in this realm, when we look at the expected fantasy points for a team like Las Vegas, and we see that it's all pretty low, that doesn't tell me that I want to play Genty instead of a stack. That just tells me that I just want to avoid the game. Because I think that if they don't score from deep downfield, maybe they score a touchdown, maybe they score 2, but I think that the offense in general is just bad. So I would rather just be low on Las Vegas. Now that there are other teams that I'm interested in, like you had mentioned, the Rams. I think the Rams are just a terrific spot to be. That doesn't necessarily mean that I like Matthew Stafford, but I love Puka Nacua and I love Devontae Adams. I played those two without Matthew Stafford last week. I will likely do it again this week if I don't play Nacua plus Kyron Williams. The other team that I think is really interesting this week is Philadelphia. People talk a lot about how the Bears are a really, really bad defense, but if you go over to Fantasy Life and you look at the fantasy boost applied to quarterbacks, like Jaguars are right there, man. They're one of the worst pass defenses in the league as well. Now, obviously, the Cowboys, we don't get to pick on them this week, but
no, Philadelphia's playing the Bucks. You mean the Bucks? We're right below.
Oh yeah, the Bucks. Yeah. Like we have a nice fantasy boost there as well, right? So I think that it makes a lot of sense to look at Philadelphia stacks who are right there.
Yeah, they're going to be low owned, very low owned.
They're low owned and they're cheap, right? Yeah. Like I mean, they're cheaper than this Ram stack at 20,000.
Yeah.
Usually last year, Philadelphia stacks were upwards of 21, 22,000. They were the most expensive stacks on the slate every single week. So to be able to get Philadelphia stacks in a nice matchup with a good team total at a price point that I think is acceptable and low ownership, that's a really, really nice spot. So the Rams, Philadelphia, I think San Francisco is in a pretty decent spot. I wouldn't mind going back to Brock Purdy, playing Purdy plus Pearsall plus Christian McCaffrey. I've done that, and I've had good success with that. And then the other one that I think is really interesting that we didn't really talk about or that you didn't mention that I think is going underlooked here is Indianapolis. Daniel Jones has been playing incredibly well. He has a huge rushing floor as well. Michael Pittman and Tyler Warren are both popular pieces. And by the way, it costs barely $15,000 to stack them. They're cheap as fuck. So you can do whatever you want with Daniel Jones, Michael Pittman, and Tyler Warren as your base stack. And it's not like the median is all that bad. The 4X, I think, is the best on the slate at 12.9. And the ownership is not high enough. Most of the ownership, in fact, going to Tyler Warren. So
that's part of why I was saying that this slate is a choose your own adventure slate. Because depending on your field size, like if you're playing smaller field, you can just be creative about the more popular games. I don't think you necessarily need to avoid them. Like you can play the Chargers Giants game, but hey, look at the number 2 stack there. Like you could play a Herbert double. Like no one's gonna play a Herbert double. Like everyone's playing Omari and Hampton, right? Like or Scadaboo. Like what if it's just fucking Herbert to McConkey and Keenan Allen and Hampton? Like last week they had a little more running back usage, so everyone's super excited about Hampton, especially with the injury they have, where Hampton is basically their only running back. Totally get it, but guess what? The first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, everybody was talking about how the Chargers are the heaviest pass team in the whole fucking league. So now because they had 1 week where they use Hampton a bunch, he's like they're gonna just make him a workhorse. Like it's very possible that Herbert throws touchdowns to Allen and McConkey, right? And McConkey finally fucking gets there. By the way, at low ownership, especially after last week when people took a chance on him and he still didn't get there. If you want to play a little bigger field, you say, you know what, maybe I'll just play pieces of those games, but I'm not going to focus on the popular games. I'm going to focus on a little bit of the less popular games. And then if you want to play really large field, you say, I'm going to actually game stack one of these games that's lower on. One of the nice things about a slate like this one, where you can tailor your build strategy to your field size, is that ownership the soakage, like sort of where all the ownership goes, is fairly predictable, and you can use that to decide what you're going to do. And so the other game, I think that you mentioned one of the games that I think is going to go overlooked. Like one of the games that's going to go overlooked is Philadelphia Tampa. Like that game has a nice total. Those are two decent offenses, and there's a lot of ways to attack it. The other game that I don't like my brain is telling me from a game theory standpoint, like you should have one team that is heavily invested in this game, but like everything I look at and my heart tells me I can't and I don't want to, is Baltimore KC. Like that game is going to be fucking unowned compared to all these other games. But if we sort by game totals, there's 3 games. There's one game. There's basically 4 games with really good game totals. 2 of them are getting a ton of ownership. Indy Colts are number 1 with a 49.5 game total, which has climbed by 3 points. Las Vegas, Chicago has a 48-point game total, also getting a lot of ownership. Buffalo, New Orleans has a high game total, but that one it's all Buffalo. They have a 31.5 game point total, and New Orleans has a 17. So Buffalo's expected to crush them, right? It doesn't mean that like Jawan Johnson or Olave or even Rattler don't have value, but it's not like one of these more evenly matched games where there's shootout potential. And the other game at the top there with a 48.5 game total, right? More than the Chicago Las Vegas and 1 point less than Los Angeles Indy is Baltimore KC. And those fucking players from that game are unowned, completely unowned. And the reason is because you either have to play like a super expensive Lamar with who the fuck you pair him with, you don't know, right? Or you have to play Mahomes, who everyone is like, the fucking Chiefs suck now. Like you can't play Mahomes anymore. But I'm just saying, for larger field, there's a decent chance that like Vegas, Indy, like have some pieces that go off, and Chicago, Las Vegas, like have some pieces that go off. But fucking Baltimore KC is a game that gets totally nutty at way lower ownership. And I just think it's important to point that out because it just seems like too obvious. And as you can tell, like I'm trying to convince myself because I don't want to do it, but it feels like dumb not to.
Yeah. I think that there's some bias there to say these are really good teams, so they're going to score a lot of points. But I think that also people need to understand that the Chiefs are not a good offense. Like they've been one of the worst offenses in the regular season for the better part of 2 years. They have an offensive coordinator that does not want to push the ball down the field. Patrick Mahomes is incredible, but he's basically just got him and then no one else. And there's my child. What's up, bud? How you doing? Good night. I love you. God, he's so cute. What a cute What a cute kid.
Anyway. I think if I don't disagree with you, and that's why I don't want to play the game. I'm just pointing out that everybody feels that way, and it has a high game total. So if we're wrong, and the Chiefs just had a bad start, like we're going to be like, why the fuck did we not play this super high total game when it was unowned? That's all I'm saying.
I'm with you on that.
And then the other thing to point out there is if you're not playing that game, and I don't know that I'll convince myself to do it, is it's worth considering whether you fucking go back to Henry. Because someone's going to score points in that game. I guess it could go like way under, but like it's hard to imagine that the Baltimore Ravens don't score like 3 or 4 touchdowns. And so if you don't want any Lamar or anybody else from that game, maybe you play a really low owned Henry, who, if you want to play the narrative game, coming off that like bad fumble in prime time, wants to avenge himself. I don't know if you need another reason to convince yourself besides the fact that he's Derrick Henry.
So the Ravens are also a bad defense, to be fair. To Ed Mass's point here. If we're happy to attack the Bucks, if we're happy to attack the Bears, the Ravens have given up 22.7 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. The Bears 22.6. If we look at wide receivers, then it's a little bit worse, I guess. Oh wow, I thought this was going to be higher. It's pretty neutral for wide receivers. That's interesting. What about running backs? Is it higher for running backs?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is Henry's only like.
Oh yeah, it's running backs. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay.
I mean, the other reason Henry's going to be low owned, by the way, is somebody put in the chat, like, if I'm playing anything, I'm playing Henry at 7,200. Like, there's another reason Henry's going to be low owned, right? Because CMC, Puka, and then everybody wants those mid-range receivers like Jacoby Myers and Keenan Allen. And so Henry's kind of like in this by the way, he's $100 more than James Cook. And the way that people are going to get exposure to that Buffalo New Orleans game is they're going to say, well, I'm not playing fucking $10,000 million Josh Allen. I'm just going to play James Cook, and he's going to run it 70 times. So I think Henry's a very interesting sort of low owned, high upside running back play.
Yeah. Here's what I'll say about Baltimore, Kansas City. I think that it makes sense, and I could absolutely see the game going off. My problem with it is that Kansas City typically, especially with the way the offense is built and the way that it operates now, it is very hard to find one wide receiver that does well. If Patrick Mahomes does not absolutely nuke, it's hard to get Kansas City stacks across the line. Just because, like, you choose, Hollywood Brown, and he has 5 for 88 and a touchdown, but then also Thornton has 2 for 48 and a touchdown, and Kelsey has 6 for 90 and a touchdown. And it's like none of them did anything that was incredible, but Patrick Mahomes went absolutely nuclear. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same thing with Buffalo, but like with Buffalo, typically the prices are so low that you can make it out without needing one of their wide receivers to go absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to Mitch's point earlier, if Worthy is the guy that ends up going insane at 5.8K, that's great. It's hard. Kansas City is such a better showdown team than main slate team because of these kind of things, right? They're dripping with variance. Whereas Baltimore is very much like you can do Lamar Jackson plus one of the wide receivers or plus Mark Andrews, and you can get away with it because of his rushing upside. And then you also have Derrick Henry as well, which again at 7,200, like everybody's going to play James Cook over Derrick Henry. So yeah, the ownerships are low. They're kind of reserved for the Millie Maker for me. I would not touch them in single entry. I just don't think that I could do it. There are just better plays on the slate. There's more consistent plays on the slate, but it's going to be low owned for a reason. And I hear you for sure.
I want to bring up a question somebody brought up, and I think it's a good segue to something we should talk about for a minute. And then it's related to a second thing. Someone wrote, Dicey wrote, in the comments, Hampton being 30 to 35%. I'm not sure he's going to get that high, but he'll be chalky. Is not the same as Mason last week, and that I think was when I was sort of saying you can play Herbert doubles as a way of getting off Hampton. One of the things I like to do with chalk is ask myself if we're making assumptions that are more fragile than people want to admit, right? And that's kind of the point I was making about Hampton. I was saying, like, we're assuming Hampton has this like super roll against the Giants when the Chargers have been super pass heavy aside from last week. I totally understand there's an injury boost to him too, because of that'll give him some more usage. And this isn't even that much about Hampton. It's more about saying to yourself, like, which players are owned. It's a way of saying, okay, which chalk do I think has assumptions that make the chalk less robust? And if I think the chalk is not as reliable as people think it is, what are ways I can take advantage of that, right? So Hampton's one we talked about. Vegas is another one. Like, I just feel like we should bring up a few of these players that are going to be really owned this week, and we've alluded to it, but I think they're important ones because while ownership is a little more spread out, there are still some players ownership's going to coalesce around. And the ones I would bring up are on the running back side, it's Omarion Hampton. We've talked about CMC. I think CMC is really good chalk, and I'm not overthinking him. James Cook will be owned, but not crazy owned. And then receivers where we're kind of going to see a little more steam around some guys. Jacoby Myers is one. Olave, I think, will be owned. Like he's in general, people feel like he's underperformed his opportunity, and people have been like itching to get him in at 5,100. I think he's not going to be super owned, but he'll be owned. And then it's like Trey Tucker and some of those Bears Vegas guys, Odunze. So of those guys who are getting some ownership, I'll mention tight end while we're at it. Like a tight end, Tyler Warren will be like a pretty chalky tight end play this week. I think everybody else will be a little more muted. Like it's not going to be quite as intense. I think the biggest spots that I think are exploitable, one is O'Marion Hampton, and I like that our sheets don't think he's great value. Two is Jacoby. Like that's a little scary to say because I actually understand why he projects so well, both at our site and elsewhere at 5,400 because of his usage. I just could see that game like not going as crazy as people think, and I could see it going to Trey Tucker or Bowers or Jonty. I think this idea that it's all going to go to Myers is a little bit, just simplistic. So, but what are your thoughts on like exploiting sort of inefficient assumptions around chalk?
Yeah, I think that it's important, especially in week 4, to say that we are still kind of flying blind. And people make these assumptions about things based off of what has happened, but ignore what likely should have happened. I do think that specifically around Jacoby Myers, I had already said earlier that I think the Las Vegas offense might just suck. And if the Las Vegas offense sucks, then that's going to drag down the whole ship. And we might see double-digit ownership for all of Jacoby Myers, Trey Tucker, and Geno Smith, right? Quarterback.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might see double-digit ownership for all of those guys. But for sure, we're going to see double-digit ownership for Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker. So I think that in situations like that, whenever a bad team is chalk, I'm happy to just kind of like wash my hands of that and let other people kind of make those mistakes for the most part. Now, what I will say is even when people are overconfident in chalk, it doesn't necessarily mean that I want to avoid it entirely. I'm fine with eating some Jacoby Myers chalk if I think that the rest of my lineup has enough leverage already that I can just be like, fuck it, I'll just play Jacoby Myers. But, especially when I MME, one of the things that I'm trying to do for the most part is say, okay, if this player is going to be chalk, I need to make sure that I'm not playing them with other players that I am a little bit wary of, and that people are overvaluing. But when we look at this week for ownership, it doesn't apply all that much, I don't think.
It's a lot flatter.
Yeah. Like, if Jacoby Myers was going to project to be 30% owned like Rome Odunze, I was really skeptical of Rome Odunze last week, right? Like, I did not play him. I was very skeptical of him. And people are looking at Jacoby Myers as the exact same play this week, and that's wrong, right? Like, it's not the same situation. Because this might be a hot take. I think that Caleb Williams is better than Geno Smith. And I think that the Chicago offense is better than the Las Vegas offense. And I think that the Dallas Cowboys defense is miles worse than the Chicago Bears defense. So I think that all of these things say that Jacoby Myers is not Rome Odunze. And I was low on Rome Odunze last week. So, of course, I'm going to be even lower on Jacoby Myers. Now, to your point on O'Marion Hampton, and I want to make this point. O'Marion Hampton, I'm going to pull up the research sheets here. So in week 1 and week 3, he essentially had the same role. His expected fantasy points were just way higher in week 3 because he had a couple more targets and he had rushes from inside the 5 yards. And when you get those things, your expected fantasy points go way up. So he has looked fine, but I don't think that his role is going to be dramatically different than it was before the injury to Najee Harris. I think that his role was fine. His role was good. Is he going to get a couple more targets? Sure. I think it equates to, 1-2 more targets per game, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I do think that he will likely have a near monopoly on inside the 5 rushes. I think that that's fine. Like, he's going to be a notably better play. And with all of that being said, his expected fantasy points average was still 14.62 before the Najee Harris injury. So I think he's a slightly better play than he would have been, but he's 5,900, and that's still like inching up there in price. Like Kyren Williams is 6,300. I think that you're not necessarily getting like some slam dunk running back play out of Amari and Hampton. I think he's a good play, but I don't think that he's a slam dunk.
I think there's just a lot of, I think it's important to admit that there's just like a lot of weight. One of the inefficiencies, I keep saying inefficiencies, but at the end of the day, like a lot of what we're trying to do in DFS is just to find inefficiencies and figure out how to exploit them, right? In that Chargers Giants game, like there's just, I think what you can do is you can say like, is the field overconfident about the way a game is going to play out? And and that might mean that people are overconfident. Hampton, so you play the Chargers passing stacks. That might mean that people are overconfident the Chargers kill the Giants, and so you play dart and you play Scattaboo, right? There's just, and you can do that with the Vegas Bears game, and you can do the same thing with the Colts Rams game. Or you can just say, you know what, I'm getting off the board and I'm going to play the fucking Bucks Eagles, or I'm going to get even more off the board and play the Ravens Chiefs, right? And that is what I was talking about before about building to your field size. Like I for smaller single entry 3 max, like I probably won't get off the more popular games. I'm just going to try to play them in ways that are creative. The other thing I'll say is that while ownership for sure is flatter this week, and this was a point that was more relevant to last week when we had the 5 running backs that were kind of like the obvious 5 running backs everyone played. There is still, especially for MME players, I think, a kind of like a next tier down of ownership with a lot of players in both the games we've talked about and lesser owned games that have a lot of upside that will be really low owned. Like a lot of the mid-range receivers and running backs, like a lot, like more than I'm used to seeing this week. Like in the Colts game, like Pittman like is going to be owned, but like he'll be single digit in most fields, right? I already mentioned Ladd McConkey. Like Ladd McConkey won't be very owned. There's a ton of players in that like 5,500 to 7K range. And I think one interesting way to play this week is say, I am, to your point on like full total lineup leverage, say, I'm going to play a lineup that's appropriately leveraged for my field size. And one of the ways I'm going to lever is by playing some of these lesser owned, high upside, mid-range players that are just fucking not owned. And they're only not owned because people are just so anxious and itchy to play those game environments we've already talked about that they're overlooking these other guys. Mm-hmm. Gibbs is another one. Somebody mentioned in the chat. Like that's another good example.
Yeah, I think that this is a perfect week to do these pivots. I said at the beginning of this where I think that people are just going to make a lot of mistakes when it comes to picking their wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s this week. Running back is not hard, I don't think. If we look at running back, like, look, we can just parse this down and say, fuck it, just give me running backs. And let's take a look. It's like, okay, Christian McCaffrey, fucking great play. Jonathan Taylor, awesome. You want to play Bijan Robinson? Be my guest. Jahmyr Gibbs, awesome. Saquon Barkley is going to be under-owned. I think he's actually a really, really good play. Bucky Irving, like, looks good. James Cook, fine. You want to eat some chalk? Go for it. Kyren Williams, like, look, we have running backs that we can play. And you fucking pick your poison, right? It's wide receiver where people are going to fuck up this week. Because then if we go over to wide receiver and say, okay, just show me wide receivers, like, yes, Puka Nacua, terrific play. But then, we have all of this non-ownership all the way down to Jacoby Myers, who projects as like wide receiver 22 or something like that on the slate. But he's behind Quentin Johnson and behind Ricky Pearsall and behind Keenan Allen and behind Debo and behind McMillan and behind Devontae Adams. And like, these are all guys who are well within range of him. Devontae Smith is 5,400. Chris Olave is 5,100, right? We have all these. We haven't even really touched on Debo Samuel. But Debo Samuel at 3% owned, there is no Terry McLaurin.
Yeah. And by the way, Mariota, who like again, everybody was fucking thrilled to play last week. Like we were like, if you don't play Mariota, you're kind of dumb. Like he was in like half my lineups.
Yeah.
You can play Mariota with Debo, and you have like you have 2 players that are like unknown, right? Forget Dart. You can just go 500 to Mariota if you want.
Right. And it's 11K to play those two, right? I mean, like it's not this just people are going to make so many mistakes this week because when you sort by ownership, it's like, oh, everyone's going to jam Jacoby Myers and Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua is a fine play. People are going to jam Jacoby Myers. I think that Trey Tucker is going to get squeezed up. He's going to be 20% owned. Like Devontae Adams is going to end up 16, 17% owned. I think that we'll see a couple more of these guys like Chris Olave, I think is going to catch some ownership. But like then you still have, like you sort by median, or let's sort by 3X. Olave, Keenan Allen, Juwan Jennings, Michael Pittman, Quentin Johnson, Devontae Smith, Datoria McMillan, Ricky Pearsall, Roma Dunze. Everyone was tripping over themselves to play Roma Dunze at 5,400. Nobody is going to be playing him this week. It projects for 10%, but I'm going to take under on that. Like nobody's going to play him at 6,300. So we have all of these plays at wide receiver, and so it makes it really, really easy this week, I think, where – and this is kind of like where we end up on with how you approach the roster construction stuff. I'm fine with just playing the chalk running backs and then just getting different at wide receiver. It's really easy this week. Sometimes it's not as easy, right? Sometimes last week it was harder. 2 weeks ago it was harder. There were really, really good wide receiver plays. This week, man, you can play whoever you want. Now, the one caveat that I have there, I did run the portfolio manager before we started things up so that I could take a look. I did want to show really quick that Puka Nacua and Christian McCaffrey are basically just locked in place.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like those to me, like if you're playing, especially smaller field, I would just start with those 2 players. And if you can fit them with some of the pay up quarterbacks, you're like, great. But if not, just fucking play May or Dart or Mariota with those 2 guys.
Right. I mean, Puka Nacua is like, he shows up a fucking lot.
It's really hard to avoid those 2 players this week. Like for me in smaller field, it's very hard to avoid.
I will say that, when we're looking at this, like Trey Tucker shows up a lot. If I'm saying like, oh, I'm super not into Trey Tucker and I remove him, then it's kind of like, all right, well, what does that leave me with in terms of players? Do I still get as much Christian McCaffrey and Puka Nacua? And yes, of course I do. Now I'm just getting a lot of Chris Olave and Keenan Allen.
Right.
And that's fine, right? Like we're fine with that. Oh, and guess what? We also get a shit ton of Marcus Mariota.
Yeah.
Because he's 5K and like we can just plug and play. So there are ways, especially if you play cheap quarterback, to not have to play kind of like the shaky wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s that people are going for and still get Christian McCaffrey and Puka Nacua.
Yeah. And I honestly, when I started, James somewhat famously convinced me to stop playing on FanDuel. Thank you, James, as well as others. One of the things I did not like about DraftKings when I first came over 3 years ago was I felt like you had to nail the dart throw punt receiver. And that was true for a while when you had really tighter pricing, because it was like you had to get up to Hurts or Josh Allen or the pay ups. But when you have these quarterbacks that are just so cheap, and if you and especially when you have a bunch of them, when you have May and you have Mariota and you have Dart, and if you don't like those guys, you can just go up a little bit to Geno, or you can go up a little bit to one of the other guys who are at least mid-range, like even Stafford. You don't have to force, like one of the notes I made to myself this morning when I was going through the slate is like, don't force thin plays. Like there's just no need to. Like I'm not saying be a chalk donkey and play every fucking chalk player, but even if you don't play Jacoby Myers, you just went through all those receivers. Like you can play a zillion different receivers in the mid-range who all project really well in really nice spots at low ownership, because we have salary relief at quarterback, and we have and we have good running backs, and outside of CMC, the running backs aren't even that expensive either. Like they're not punt guys. Like I'm not into Hampton. I do think Scadaboo is going to be a little bit overlooked for the same reasons people don't want to play Dart. And we have a really nice projection on Scadaboo in terms of like he's the only guy like down in that he look, his relative value is fantastic at very low ownership. He's like the running back version of Jackson Dart, for the same reasons that people don't want to play Jackson Dart, right? So I think it's an exploitable slate. I do. I think what's going to be hard about it is I think it's a little bit of a better of a large field slate, because I think what you can do with like Portfolio Manager and with MME, if you're good at doing it, is you can do what you said. You can you can limit your running back exposure to like the top like 8 or 9 guys that you really like, and you can more heavily expose yourself to CMC. And then you just like rotate around the cheaper quarterbacks and the receivers. With small field, you kind of like you need to sort of make some flag plants, and that can be hard, and especially when there's like a lot of different ways to do it. The last thing I want to say before we answer any final questions is, if you do really like a spot and it's not the appropriate leverage for your field size, consider playing either the early or the late slate to play that spot. Like, so I actually want to overstack the Rams Indy game. Like, I kind of like Stafford like triples even, because they're so fucking concentrated in that offense with Kyron, Puka, and Devontae. But I can't really justify it for the main slate. It's too much for me to swallow. Like when I'm just giving up too much median, honestly. But that's why I'm gonna play a couple more contests in the late slate, because I think it's fine for late slate, right? So it's not something we talk about enough. I try to mention it when we do these, because I don't think enough of the fantasy world in general does it, which is be thoughtful about what contests you register to. And something I heard Mike Leone actually say he got advice on, which I came to that conclusion a year or two ago, was he said, build some lineups to see kind of like what you like, and then register for the contest sizes that are appropriate for what you like, right? So if you like shit that's super fucking leverage, and if you want to game stack Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, fucking play some larger field stuff, right? If you like some of the chalkier games, but you want to get creative with it, sure, then play some of the smaller single entry 3-max stuff. If you really like the late games with the Chargers, Colts, and you want to overstack it in a way that you don't think is super viable for early or main, just play the late slate a little heavier, right? I don't think people sort of curate their DFS play enough. And I think that's like an advanced skill that once you've played enough DFS, you get better at. But I think it's something that I wanted to mention, because I do think it helps people get better at what we do.
Look how sick this lineup is. Matthew Stafford, Kyron Williams, Cam Scatabo, Ricky Pearsall, Puka Nacua, Chris Olave, Tyler Warren, Keenan Allen, Lions defense.
Yeah, there's so many good lineups you can build this week. It's almost just kind of like you just have to choose what you believe in the most for your field size.
I parsed this down to just Rams 3-man stacks, just so that we could take a look at kind of like the options. And like the overall top median is Patrick Mahomes naked with Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams. In fact, if I go and I analyze the players here and we take a look at what the exposures are for the players, Matthew Stafford shows up in 92%, but like there's still plenty of lineups that end up without Matthew Stafford there. The one that is the most valuable is Puka Nacua, but you can take a look at these, and like I had said, I don't mind going with no Matthew Stafford and instead going with Kyron Williams, Devontae Adams, Nacua.
Yeah.
I think
the one argument for Stafford, which I think is a little more relevant for him than other quarterbacks with this strategy. And by the way, one of my favorite lineups I've built so far that I'll probably play is a Stafford double without Stafford. but to counter myself on that, like, it's a little easier to convince yourself to do that when the quarterback runs. And Stafford, like, the only way he's getting there is if he's kind of for him to get there, he has to drag receivers with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means if Devontae Adams and Puka get there, Stafford's probably getting there. But again, it's not a 1v1. The problem is Stafford is like $2,500 more than Jackson Dart, right? And when you play him, that means you end up having to play guys like Trey Tucker or Adonai Mitchell, and you're probably better off just playing Jackson Dart because he's less fragile than Adonai Mitchell is. That's kind of like, I think that's like the secondary piece of this that people are missing when they force the Stafford double, right? That's kind of what we said at the beginning a little bit.
So here's your fucking banger. Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua with Jackson Dart, Christian McCaffrey, Trey Tucker, Keenan Allen, Brock Bowers, Tyler Warren, Titans defense.
That's pretty sick.
That's a banger right there. And again, this is, I'm kind of showing off a little bit of what you can do with Portfolio Manager right now. But like, if you, like you, Pablo, just wanted to say, I want to just look at the Ram stacks that are 2-mans that do not have Matthew Stafford and just take a look at what I can get. Like, you can get Lamar Jackson, Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua with Bucky Irving, Trey Tucker, Keenan Allen, Juwan Johnson, Tyler Warren, right? Like, this is a lineup that you could play with even an elite quarterback instead of Matthew Stafford. And Lamar Jackson's ceiling is for sure higher. You can look at lineups where this one has CJ Stroud, but this one is Christian McCaffrey, Cam Scatterbo, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, Trey Tucker, Juwan Johnson, Tyler Warren, the Commanders defense. Like, you could even pay this down to Dart and then come up from a Juwan Johnson or a Tyler Warren and get, more upside at your flex position. So this is something that I think, like, this is what I like to do when I'm looking at kind of, if I wanted to play a stack without the quarterback, this is how I would be doing it. And I would do the inverse of this as well. I agree with you that I think that Matthew Stafford needs, like, if Matthew Stafford gets there, he takes Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams with him, just point blank, period. There's I don't have any question about that, really. So he is probably like a better play than a Mac Jones or something like that, right? Where, like, the players can get there around him without necessarily him getting there himself. Whereas Matthew Stafford is completely relying on those two guys. So but I'm with you. I think that this week, like, it kind of pays itself really well to what I have been preaching over at Pater this year, in that you don't necessarily have to think about the quarterback in your stack, especially when we have such condensed target shares for wide receivers and these teams that are only going to throw to like 3 or 4 guys, or you have a Daniel Jones or a Drake May or a Jackson Dart, where it's just like, it doesn't even matter if they score 30 fantasy points, as long as they score 20 and 25, like, you are in competition. So it's a good one.
So let's do 2 things. Is there any final questions? And then if there's any specific play that you've been popping up around that makes you excited to play that player, do you want to do some final questions first?
Yeah. Let me.
I don't know if I've been trying to keep up with them somewhat as we've been talking.
Inefficient assumptions would be a sick Matic YouTube thumb. Man, fuck Matic. Gibbs.
I can't wait for someone to steal that as a podcast title on DFS. Inefficient assumption. I'm not famous enough for that, but somebody should use it.
It's a really good one, actually. Well, I do have a platform. I own a site. We could do that.
Inefficient. Maybe we should call this that. Inefficient assumptions. That's not a bad Slate Talk name.
That's good. We're okay. Fucking trademark it now. Can you go trademark that really quick?
Inefficient.
Give us a sick play tomorrow, as well as Laporta. Yeah, Detroit has a really, really good team total. And also, I think that Detroit against Cleveland, like, I don't think that Cleveland is good, but Quinshon Judkins is going to go under-owned, I think, for his role, which was really good last week. I'll talk more about Quinshon Judkins in the Discord, I think.
Yeah, I might be overreacting a little bit to primetime Lions Ravens, but I also do look, defense is defense. Like, I don't overthink it. Just like play, like, whatever you like and whatever you can fit.
Yeah.
I will say I kind of am excited to try to figure out if I can play Detroit against the Browns. I think Detroit's defense is fucking really good this year, and and the Browns are the type of team that will just chuck it 50 times, and Flacco against Hutchinson is going to be a problem for Flacco.
God, fucking statue. Scott shows up a lot in the Sims. Yeah, he's a really good play.
He's a good play, man. Scat is a good play. People are so scared to play Scat and Dart this week. It's of all the assumptions that I'm kind of most excited to play, which is kind of not my MO, because I've generally been risk averse, and that's why I play smaller field. I think Scat, Dart are those are the 2 plays that project really, really well, that should be way more owned than what the field's going to use them for, because everyone's scared to play them against the Chargers.
Yeah, when I run through the portfolio manager, I mean, Scatterbo shows up quite a bit with Puka Nacua. Trey Tucker shows up as the main line value, but man, 54% of my lineups have Christian McCaffrey and Puka Nacua. I'm just gonna lock them.
Yeah.
Scatterbo is a really, really good play tomorrow at 5,500. Let's see. What are the injuries for the 49ers? So I need to be looking at Bourne. Man, I played Bourne last week and it pissed me off.
I don't think you need to. It's just maybe for super large field, but we have so much value that there's no need to play these. I think the injuries for the Niners are basically Pearsall and Jennings are questionable, but what I've heard in the industry is that Jennings is a true questionable and Pearsall, we'll find out later tonight. So we'll know by tomorrow morning. But I think Pearsall is probably playing, but just play CMC. And then if you really want to play somebody else, play Pearsall. And if we get clearance on Jennings, I think he's a fine play too. He's pretty cheap.
Yeah. I don't mind Bourne in large field. I might have some in the millie, but I don't. I wouldn't look at him outside of that. How feasible is playing Dart against good Chargers defense? So we've touched on that a whole bunch on this one, but just to answer this one, because I know that you came in a bit late, we think he's way undervalued. He's a strong play, 4,500. We've been jamming cheap quarterbacks all year so far, and I'm not going to stop now, even with the Chargers defense being good. I think that Dart is. I used to have this theory in baseball where when a player got called up, their first game, they would that was like their ceiling.
It's very true for pitchers. I do that all the time for pitchers in baseball because there's no book on them yet. There's the scouting reports are all from the minors, and they don't really have a good report on those guys.
Yeah. So I think that you get these guys who are getting a start, and there's a human element that is just non-quantifiable, right? And so we end up with these guys who, for Dart, it's a quarterback. He can inject a lot of life into this offense. He can be this beacon of hope for the New York Giants. There's a lot of reasons to think that he would be, propped up, that they're going to throw everything that they can into this offense and into this script to make sure that he looks good. So, 4,500 for a rookie making his first start. I think that he's a fine play, even against the Chargers defense. Now, I don't think that I will have, he's not 4,000, and that $500 does make a bit of a difference. And there are other plays that I think you can play that, this is not like a Mac Jones starting situation where I was just why the fuck is the field not just he should be 35% owned. I think Dart should be 20% owned, 15 to 20, but he won't be. He won't be even 5% owned, right? So I'm happy to have some. I'm probably going to have him mixed in with Daniel Jones and Marcus Mariota and these other cheap quarterbacks. But, he's definitely undervalued. So, yeah, let's move on to the players that we are just most into this week. Pablo, why don't you give one that is just kind of a more the player that you want to build around?
Well, I'll just say I will probably have Puka and CMC in almost every lineup. So, but we've already sort of said that. Look, we've already talked about Dart a much. I'm going to have Dart in at least 2 of my 3 or 4 lineups. I think it's just he's too cheap for all the reasons you just mentioned. At the flex position, a guy you mentioned who I think is ironically underowned this week. It's kind of funny. I think some of it's because of his price, and some of it is just because there's just so many other players in this range that people want to play at receiver. Is Roma Dunze. It's kind of funny, right? Because he was the guy we were didn't want to play as much before. I think people are gonna be what the fuck? Why don't we play Roma Dunze again? Why wasn't he just why aren't we talking about Roma Dunze the way people are talking about Jacoby Myers this week? I don't really understand that. So, and I would even I'll take it one step further. I think the weird play in that game that I think is interesting is Moore. No one's gonna play Moore. He's gonna be 3%. He's maybe 2 off the board for my shit. But he was I totally get that Odunze kind of inherited the mantle of the guy this year in Chicago, and so far that's been definitely true. But Moore started getting some play last week, and he's a really good player. They even designed some runs for him last week because I think they wanted to get him more involved. I think he's going to be the type of guy that's an example of a guy who I think is really good, has not had the role people expected so far. And it's kind of like playing the 6-hitter in a game that scores 20 runs in baseball, or 10 runs in baseball, instead of playing the 4-hitter. So I think so Dart is kind of my obvious one we talked about. Odunze is my still kind of missionary, and then Moore is my a little bit off the wall.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna say this. And I'm gonna have some macro stands here this week rather than individual players, because I do think that it's harder this week to be like, I absolutely love this guy. But I have a couple of macro stands. One, I don't think I'm going to play any quarterback over $6,000. I think I'm just going to remove him from my pool. I like a lot of running back, or a lot of quarterbacks under 6K, right? So I just think that I'm going to keep it there. And that has me. I am really into the idea of playing Daniel Jones and Indianapolis stacks. If I have like any individual stack stand, I think that that's the stand that I like the most. And then the other macro stand that I think I'm going to take is I think I'm going to take all of Las Vegas out of my pool.
That's ballsy.
Yeah, I think that there are just so many ways that you can get value and make plays work without Trey Tucker and without Jacoby Myers, and removing them and saying, I think that Las Vegas's offense sucks, and saying that I don't think that the Chicago Bears defense is going to be a defense that like is just dog shit atrocious all year. I think that they have had some bad games, but like, I don't think that they're the Cowboys. I think there's just going to be too much ownership on Las Vegas. So I think that I might remove them from my pool. And that would probably be enough, just those two things, to where I could just like optimize on ownership otherwise and just be happy. Right. So I think that there's some easy ways, not necessarily to find upside, but to kind of say, I think that I'm going to avoid these landmines and remove 40% of the field in doing so. And it lets you kind of build in a really free way. So let's see. That's wild. I like LB tomorrow. They're underpriced. Yeah, they are underpriced if you think that they're an offense that is, league average or good. And I don't necessarily see from the expected fantasy points that they are an offense that we should be super high on. Junty looks good, but the rest of the offense sucks. I mean, like, there's a reason why his expected fantasy points is like less than 10. It's because they can't get into the red zone. Like they're not good. Genty might look good, but he is getting contacted like 100% of the time behind the line of scrimmage. I just don't think they're a good offense. So another question here: am I going to play Neighbors with Dart? Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's absolutely.
I think you can. I don't think you have to. I think Dart is cheap enough with at 4,500. He could run one in, and he could throw one to Scadaboo. He could throw one to the short guy. What's his name? The other receiver they have. I always forget his name.
Wendell Robinson. Yeah.
But I would put Neighbors in the category of what we were saying before of the upside. One of those many receivers with upside potential that won't be owned. And one of the nice things is he, if you do play Dart, they're correlated. So I think it's a really nice play.
Yeah, he's 7K. I mean, Neighbors.
I don't think you have to. But I don't think you have to.
No, you don't have to. By any means. I think you can play Dart I think
himself. You play Dart totally naked. Yeah.
He's 4,500. You just treat him like a tight end and you just play him by himself. I think that's totally fine. But if you want to play him and have the correlation with Neighbors, I think that's great. Like, do that, and then if you want to do even more than that, right? And say like this game has like some cheap guys. I mean, Keenan Allen is still really, really cheap and is producing really, really well. You can still play him on the other side of Malik Neighbors and Jackson Dart if you want to.
Yeah.
So I think that there are a lot of ways to find relative ownership on this slate and upside. But yeah, this slate, this looks like a pay dirt James crushes this slate kind of slate. So I'm excited to win $1 million tomorrow. That's what I'll say.
I'm excited. I too will almost exclusively be focused on sub 6K quarterbacks. The only one I might make an exception for is the guy who have a little bit of a man crush these days, which is Justin Herbert. I just think that people. I do think the Chargers will score points. I like Scadaboo. I like Dart. I think we've discounted the chances that Allen, Ladd, Justin Herbert, they outscore like every other stack, and that is also supported by them being the second highest median and ceiling in our stacks. And I don't know. I might force one, but other than that, I'm totally with you. Like I'm playing pretty much exclusively the cheaper quarterbacks. I don't really see a point not to.
Yeah. Last couple questions here. Do I ever play Tucker Myers together without Geno, or play that team with Jones? 100%. Yeah. Yeah. Go for it. I would rather do that. I think that there will be more people that play them together with Geno than people that play them together without Geno. So I'm totally fine with playing them without him playing.
Once you accept that premise that you can play a double stack without the quarterback, it's a very liberating realization. Like it allows you to build lineups that other people don't build and you never would have built. It's something that I've come to this year and that you've been preaching for a while. It's a very helpful approach. Like just pretend you have Geno, but use Dart instead. And just pretend Geno's there, but it says Dart. And then just play your double without Geno.
Or at the same time, play up and play Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen.
Right.
I mean, like you can absolutely play Josh Allen by himself, and instead of the Buffalo wide receivers, which is always a fucking Russian roulette game, just play Myers and Tucker, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Little early insight to showdown season since we won't be up for 9:30. Oh yeah, we have that fucking early game. I mean, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. Give me a second.
My insight to showdown season is I will be getting bagels for my family at that time.
I hate early showdown games.
I'm not. I mean, the early. Once I did KBO, it got all the early ability in my life gone.
Let's see what we got here. I don't think ownership.
Admittedly, 9:30 showdown's not the same thing as waking up at 4 a.m. to check KBO lineups.
Yeah.
But that was all we had. In my defense, that was all we had during COVID. For a little while, all we had was KBO, and then all your fucking e-game shit started. And I tried that for a little while, and then I realized that I didn't care enough about it.
The esports days were incredible.
Yeah.
So I don't have ownership updated yet. Like the projected ownership and stuff is just fucked up right now. Like Justin Jefferson's not only going to be 36% on flex, but from an exposure standpoint, Justin Jefferson as the top exposure captain, he's not going to project for 28% ownership in the captain. So I think you can fairly say that Justin Jefferson is a good play there. Carson Wentz, Jalen Warren, Jordan Mason. I'm going to guess, let's see. I think that Aaron Rodgers is going to look bad. He still looks bad right now. So yeah, I mean, Justin Jefferson captain, highest exposures in the flex, Carson Wentz, Jalen Warren, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Mason, DK Metcalf. This is a pretty regular group. I'm going to have to rerun things in the morning just because ownership is so valuable when it comes to this stuff. But I mean, I think that if you're looking for me to say good slate, bad slate, this will be a good slate because of the way that these offenses are put together. I think that you can play double running backs from either side. Like both running backs were involved for both of these teams. Jalen Warren is banged up a little bit, so we think that he's probably going to share his role a little bit. DK Metcalf is always going to be a high upside wide receiver as well as Justin Jefferson. One thing that I think is really important with Pittsburgh is that their tight end room has been shared quite a bit. So being able to utilize double tight end builds for Pittsburgh makes for a really interesting showdown. But I'll have more info on this in the morning. I do wake up early enough to run this stuff, so we'll have plenty of info there. Anyway, I think we're good. Thank you guys for showing up and hanging out with me and Pablo doing a late stream. If you do not have a subscription to Paydirt, I think you should get one. You can see everything that we were just running through, as well as the range of outcomes, contest sims, portfolio manager, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can get all that for $40 a month, as well as MLB, NBA, NHL. There are sites out there that call themselves value, but then don't offer NBA and NHL because they're scams. But over at Paydirt, like you're going to get everything. So $40 a month gets you the entire site. $225 gets you the entire site through February 28th. Or you can try 1 week for $20 or 1 day for $5. If you have any questions for me, you can hit me up in the Discord. You can find it right here. You can link yourself into the Discord, or you can find me over on X, which I fucking hate, but you can ask me questions there if you'd like. Yeah, that's all we got. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully I win $1 million tomorrow. If I don't, hopefully it's another Paydirt logo up top. And we will talk to you guys later.
Let's get it. Good luck.